Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you may have tuned in. Welcome to this latest installment in the Black Hat webinar series, the CISO Perspective, Proactive Security in 2024, brought to you by Black Hat, Brinca, and Informa. Terry Sweeney here with Black Hat. I'll be your moderator today. Just a few quick announcements before we get started. If you've been here before, you know that this webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the speakers. We strongly encourage your participation and are happy to take your questions and comments. After today's speakers finish, they'll be answering questions. You know the drill. Type your questions into that Ask a Question text box on the bottom left of the console. We'll be answering as many questions as time permits. And as a special feature today, by asking our speakers a question, you'll automatically be entered into a drawing for a prize of your own choosing. And there are some good choices. Later in the program, we'll also be asking for your feedback about this event. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of the presentation from that resources box at the bottom of the console. We recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. And if for some reason slides aren't advancing, please press that F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your console. Finally, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the help question mark icon on the bottom right of the console. So on to our presentation, the CISO Perspective, Proactive Security in 2024. Discussing today's topic is Ahmad Fida, CEO of Brinca, Tunde Oni Daniel, Head of Technology Operations and Engineering with OneMain Financial, and Alex Babar, Vice President of Solutions for Brinca. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to kick things off with a poll for our audience. We're asking all of our listeners, how do you make trade-off decisions between addressing exposures and product features delivery today? We have a regular stakeholders meeting and process, ad hoc when there's a security incident. We do not have a process. Finally, other. So again, asking our audience to weigh in here with how they handle trade-off decisions. Gentlemen, I'd like you to look in your crystal ball. Which answer do you imagine is going to generate the most responses?
As I tend to play the optimist, I would say A, we have a regular stakeholder meeting and process and talk through it.
I agree. It's probably between A and B, or at least I hope it's between A and B. Yeah, let's say that.
What's your take?
You know, I'm an optimistic guy like Tunde. I want to think A. I'll hedge also like Ahmad, and let's fingers crossed that we're strong majority A and B together.
Okay, well, we have a clear favorite then. All right. I'll give our audience just another second or two. All right, let's see where people weighed in. Well, we have three prophets here, so congratulations, gentlemen. It seems as if you might know your audience, so that's a good way to get started here. Alex, I'll leave it with you to get us started with the larger discussion about proactive security.
All right, that sounds great. Thanks for that introduction, Terry. Actually, it's a great segue as well. Because I wanted to start off by thanking the audience, so you all. You know, I know no one tells you this enough, but you're doing a good job. You know, you're attending this webinar and being proactive at the very beginning of 2024. We were optimistic. We couldn't have planned this any better, that the first two responses would be the by far majority. And then just outside of what we're talking about today, right? Like the state of cybersecurity is a result of getting much better than historically cybersecurity has been at finding vulnerabilities. You know, and we use that term loosely now, misconfiguration, security findings, you name it. And it's across just everything across the IT stack. Your traditional on-prem infrastructure, your cloud infrastructure, your apps, your codes, The line between all those things is getting very blurry, but we're finding it all. On top of that, we've gotten very good at incident response. So putting out the fires as they arrive. It's, like job one. But I also, before we get started, I want to kind of take a step back. I think there's a reason that you all are here today in the audience to this topic of proactive security. And just, let's all acknowledge that what got us here to this good state today is not necessarily what's going to take us to that next level that we need to be as an industry, right? I mean, we should be striving to prevent the fires altogether, and you've got to start somewhere. So I don't want to belittle all the work that, everyone's done, but let's not settle for just putting them out, right? And that's why I want to thank you all, because it's a tough job, and we know that, we get that. I talked to a lot of you folks, and I know in talking to a lot of you folks that, every enterprise represented here today has a backlog of known security debt that makes you nervous, that you're trying your best to shrink, but it's hard, right? And all these things are, all these exposures are really just possible fire starters. You don't necessarily know which, when, where, why, but they're there kind of keeping you up at night. And there's some tough questions to answer, right? So for example, is it more important for your business to address an existing vulnerability, or is it, in your product portfolio, or is it more important to ship that new product feature on time? And so thankfully, I'm not tasked with answering that super hard question. But we've got two industry experts with us today to answer some questions like these. We'll have a conversation on the topic. So just quiet round of applause for Tunde, who will share his take from the CISO perspective. And then also for Ahmad, who'll share his take as a security-minded CEO from that perspective. And since we only have these two for about half an hour today for the main portion of our event, and we will do Q&A, at the end. I'm thinking we'll cover 3 topics today pertaining to proactive security. So we'll start a little bit more tailored to prioritization. Then we'll move on, talk a little about communicating risk, and we'll wrap up kind of in the main portion on measuring success. So with that said, Tunde, Ahmad, how's that sound? Are you both ready?
Good plan. I'm ready.
All right. So let's start this off with a true or false quiz. I hear this statement floating around cybersecurity now. It makes me happy that I'm hearing it now. It makes me nervous that I didn't hear it before a couple years ago. You can't fix every vulnerability. True or false? Why or why not? Tunde, why don't you kick us off?
True or false? True, you can't fix every vulnerability. Why? Not every single vulnerability is something that creates impact. So when people describe the concept of vulnerability, threat, risk, and just that whole formulation of how you get to what action do you take based on what's been reported, it becomes tremendously important to understand what the impact is. Because tremendously, we find that we have a plethora of vulnerabilities where there's just so much volume of different things that could potentially happen. And based on a world of limited resources, being able to prioritize what thing are you actually going to fix becomes essentially important. And there's different areas of concern when you think about a vulnerability. What is externally exploitable? What can cause a performance impact? What can render applications unavailable? And all the different barriers or different constraints around those vulnerabilities and the compensating controls that might exist really lends the conversation into what do you really want to do first, because you don't have all. Because if you try to fix all, in many cases, you find that organizations that try to fix all actually cause more impact or more instability because of being focused to just fix everything. So it's essential to understand what creates the most impact to an organization or to a business achieving their outcomes becomes the things to prioritize first.
Yeah, thanks, Tunde. And Ahmad, agree or disagree? I'm going to give you two both the same question to kick things off. Do you think it's possible to fix every vulnerability in your experience?
I think your question is an interesting one, right? I think I agree with Tunde to extent that you should not try to fix everything. I mean, that's because you have to look at from the impact. Now, if you have the unlimited resource, if you gave me hundreds of millions of dollars, people, can I fix everything? Sure, I'll go. But do we really want to run the business that way, right? We prioritize, we think about prioritization in our lives, in the business side. There are issues, there are things that come up, vulnerability, security findings, things that are going to be where we have to make exceptions. And it's really about effectiveness of the program and efficiencies, finding efficiency, especially in the macroeconomic environment we're in today. I don't believe that the budgets are going to double or triple in any the months that are coming. So we have to do more, or at least more with the same or more with less. And that's really where you go back to prioritization. So I think the focus is, can we do it? I think it should be more about, the focus should be about what exactly is that we want to focus on versus, try to set up that boil the ocean. So yes, prioritization is the key. And I think we'll talk more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk more. Tunde, it sounds like, I saw you nodding your head in agreement to a couple of things. I want to circle back to something that you had said around impact.
Yeah.
Let's drill into that a little bit. Why don't we help can you help the audience understand, like, how are you assessing the impact? How are you kind of making the judgment whether something's important or not?
So I use 3 different lenses for threat or through impact assessment. Number 1 is, what outcome will that vulnerability remediation achieve? Number 1, is it going to prevent a bad actor from getting to their platform? Is it going to make the platform work better? Or is it going to prevent instability or remove any inoperability issues that could be created? So really thinking about what does it do, like from an impact perspective, because if you think about everything ranking that, you have external exploits, remote code, you have local access, you have all these things that you have to put into the consideration of the qualifier of how that particular vulnerability can be exploited. The number 2 part is really understanding your threat model, because if you think about what could happen and overlaying that over the actual thing that it is. So like if I have an internally developed application that's not connected to the internet, but has a critical remote code execution vulnerability versus a database that I have sharing content to the internet and has a low or medium vulnerability, because of the fact that the vulnerability in that low impact version is something that is a remote code execution vulnerability, as I look at that, I would need to ensure that, okay, because of the threat environment, the potential for the one that is externally available, and based on the threat model that I have done, the one that's externally available is more likely to be exploited than the one that is in my 4 walls, ACL'd off, no connection to that particular environment, even though it's a remote code execution. So the reality, even though that was lower, the prioritization and the threat model that I've done allows me to determine what is the impact I create. So it's a positive impact to make sure that I'm prioritizing limited resources to focus on the right things and the right energies to remediate the things that will help the most. That will help me ensure that from an environment perspective, I'm doing the right thing first. So when you think about impact, you really think about what is the thing that you do first based on what it causes from your business or your organization or from an impact perspective. I mentioned it was 3 things, which really talks about the business impact. Like, depending on what it would cause or drive in my organization, I'm really overlaying that from a timeliness perspective. If I have a system or the database is always accessed during the day, and the lower system is always accessed in a particular at night and worked in night, I'm able to really look and laser in and say, okay, because of the fact that this is something that generates a lot of traffic, even though low, I want to prioritize that first, because the impact to the operations or to the business matters a lot. So those are the 3 qualifiers I use when I'm trying to measure impact.
Oh, thanks for sharing. I definitely have a follow-up question real quick. Ahmad, anything you want to kind of add to that, or do you think Tunde covered?
Obviously, no. I mean, I think only thing I would sort of add, given that Tunde has a different role, he's more operational day in and out. I'm looking at a little bit on the sideline, but this is what I hear consistently from other leaders like Tunde that are facing and addressing this challenge. We have access to almost everybody has access to the various threat intel, exploitability information. However, where you able to make the biggest difference or the impact is when you overlay your business information, because OneMain Financial is different from Brinca. Right? Our risk profiles, our risk tolerances are very different. Maybe there are certain things that Brinca can make exception to, but being a financial information, it's probably not allowed or is within the risk tolerance, if you will. So the bottom line, I think every organization has their own thresholds, tolerances, acceptance level. And unless you really apply, is it availability, as Tunde talked about, is it confidentiality, is it reputation risk? You may have a incident that did really, we hear about some of these incidents actually recently, even in cybersecurity companies, where the actual data is not necessarily a IP or customer confidential information, but it's a reputation risk, right? You as a cybersecurity company, you didn't really do a great job. So it does impact, at the end of the day, bottom line to your business. And if your streaming service and if your service is down for an hour or 30 seconds, I mean that's an impact to your revenue bottom line. So business impact is probably one of the biggest factor when you're looking at prioritization.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. And so there's a couple of things there. Let's circle back when we get to the communicating risk section. One or two more questions on the prioritization stream before we move on, though. So we talked a lot about identifying the impact, prioritizing what's important. I'm curious, and I think the audience is curious as well to hear your thoughts on the other side of that, right? A lot of focus goes to this is critical, we need to fix this. I do hear a lot of conversation around, well, this is not critical, but what do we do about that? Is that a risk acceptance? Is that an exception process? And like, how are we deprioritizing as well? Is it just off to a pile somewhere? It's just not important. It's not critical. So therefore we don't worry about it. So the question now, let's kind of flip prioritization on its head. Deprioritization, I guess, how are you thinking about that, Tunde? Like the other side of this, the stuff that doesn't make an impact.
So I love that question because a couple of things kind of happens when we think about it's still something that could happen. It is a vulnerability. There's still a threat condition applied to it. So I alluded to that point earlier when I was describing an impact. If we think about threat from the condition of what could happen, also consideration of what compensating controls exist, because there is a way a threat can be exploited. But the reality is there are things that we've built. Many of us have built, many CISOs, many leaders, many CEOs have built a very, very good strategy around ensuring that from a security perspective, we make it difficult for a threat actor to successfully access our critical resources. The model has been called historically defense in depth. So we have multiple layers that enables that journey. So when we think about compensating controls, one of the things that's important when you make a risk-based decision, either to accept, delay, push forward, whatever that particular decision you make, many organizations even decide to ignore, and that's a risk-based decision. But ultimately, in the risk acceptance process or the risk management process, ensuring that you understand and can document very clearly what the compensating controls exist that allows you to say, I can afford not to do this now. I'm still going to do it. It's just going to be a later time that I will do this. I'm just not going to do it right now because other things are more important for me to address now than placing the energy to work on those things at this particular point in time. But also ensuring that paying attention to those compensating controls makes sense, because once you've layered that there, if those things alter, it increases the risk of the exceptions you've made. So it's really balancing and managing risk day in, day out to ensure that we're making the right decisions for resource allocation and driving prioritization for remediation.
Got it. And that's actually probably a perfect segue. So I want to circle back to Ahmad, something you were saying earlier, the different risk profiles in the business. But let's transition here so everyone knows kind of we're going to shift gears a little bit, talk about communicating this risk, and to me it's related, right? So Tunde, Ahmad, I don't know about you, but I hear like when like folks as a whole talk about prioritization, it's really easy conceptually to talk about extremes. This is obviously really bad. This is obviously not as bad. Where it gets very difficult, in my experience, is when it's in like the stuff that's on the line. Is it above or below the line of bad or not bad? And it's such a spectrum. So one of the traps that I see just security experts fall into is over rotating into the technology side of that risk and almost under rotating onto the business impact side of that risk. So how do I take the IT, the vulnerability, the IT angle, and now elevate that to its impact to the business? So here's the question to you both. We've already kind of touched on it accidentally. How important do you feel it is for security professionals today to go that one step further and communicate risk in terms that the business can understand? When I say the business, I'm talking about folks that they might or might not be technical, but they're not security folks, and then, just that's the question. And then why? Just help everyone understand your perspective.
So one of the unique challenges that leaders have had to change over the years, if you think about the path of how people could become CISOs, some CISOs come from the business, knowing leadership and knowing how to drive a business outcome for leading strong teams, while others come from the technical track and they have that technical acumen. One of the things that happens with technical acumen-driven CISOs is we think about those things from a technical concept. And the role of the CISO has evolved. Many articles and many conversations have happened recently of just thinking about the shifted role of the CISO in the executive cadre to be able to make sure that they can articulate from a business perspective what they're trying to drive, risk from a business perspective. So I put that little qualifier to start the conversation to say, it's on us security practitioners and leaders to be able to truly articulate everything that we do from a business impact perspective. Because rather than thinking about one particular system has a remote code execution vulnerability and it's a big problem and it's critical and everything is falling and the sky is falling, to really quantifying that to a business sense to say our application and data within our critical application could be exploited based on this vulnerability and could cause our customers not to be able to access a resource is a completely different conversation. So the idea of being able to shape and really articulate in business sense the impact of this particular critical resource and this critical vulnerability to the business in ways that others can understand. So rather than saying that, oh, we have this SQL injection vulnerability and it's a problem, it really comes into having the conversation. We have an input validation concern where the application could have someone pull information they're not supposed to and violate existing controls. So the way the conversation is positioned, we're empowered to talk about it from a business impact perspective. Otherwise, we would not be able to drive the right prioritization.
No, thanks for sharing. And then this one for both of you, but maybe Ahmad, we start with you. Given your role, I think it would be helpful for the audience. Here's the question. So Ahmad, as a security-minded CISO, I don't think a security team would get any luckier than having you to report risk into, as opposed to a CISO, not at a security company. That's where that's coming from. Like if you had a tip for the CISOs and security folks out in the audience of just from your perspective, what's one thing that they could do that you see from your engagement with security folks that would just make it easier for you to make that decision? And then Tunde, I'll follow up with you. I want to kind of know how you would coach your teams, but let's start with you, Ahmad.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting question. At the end of the day, we're a cybersecurity company. We have a business to run, and nothing really works and exists in isolation, right? We do security because it allows us to actually deliver our services to our customer in a secure and more and make it more available. And the customers can trust us. Like that trust is really important. So we're not just doing security for the sake of security, right? We're doing it because it allows us to actually be a better service provider and acquire and build and grow our company. So when security, and I think Tunde talked about just this aspect, really understanding and communicating that risk back to a business in the terms they understand, but also really understanding the business as well, right? We're a software company, and our security team, when they're conducting their either it's pen tests or regular scanning or any kind of exercise that's going on, making sure that they're working with developers who, we're in a very competitive market, have features to release as well. If there is a release going on tomorrow, maybe, let's not start doing some of the, time sensitive critical tasks that day, or really coming to the table with aligning in the types of vulnerabilities that will impact our customers, given Brinka's profile. So really having that knowledge and maybe a little bit of empathy as well, I would say, from security, because historically, Tunde was talking about coming to the technical track, looking at it in a very binary, right? Either you're doing it or you're not doing it. But the real world, the business is all about the gray areas. It's everything in the middle, right? You make some decisions, you accept some risk, you put compensating controls in place. But at the end of the day, the really big thing is making sure that you understand business. What you have to kind of meet them where they are versus expecting the business to come to you. So I think able to have that level of collaboration produces really effective, delivers really effective results. That's what I've seen, and that's what I keep telling my cybersecurity team as well. And I think that's where we have a pretty good program here.
Thanks for sharing. Tunde, so kind of same question, different angle. You know, how are you coaching your teams to communicate more effectively, like the risk at the business level to the business?
Understand the business is one key thing. It's really important to understand the business that you're in. I've been in many industries. I'm with financial services today, but across different industries, it really comes down to qualifying what impact is based on a true business impact by learning the business, where if something happens to a critical part of the business and you can speak it in that manner, it becomes a different conversation. There is a different level of engagement, understanding, and transparency if you can articulate it from the perspective of business impact. So part of the coaching is ensuring that you know the business you serve. You understand the operations. You know what things are critical at what point in times, what jobs, what functions are essential during certain times of the day. So what areas don't you impact, or wouldn't you try to scan, as using the analogy that the mod used, or use or try to patch and deploy updates while those things are happening, and making those risk-deferred conversations between you and your partners in the engineering team. So which is the second theme, knowing your business. Number two, being partners with your other parts that are driving those releases. And again, as you prioritize the product plan and having a shared goal of ensuring that you're driving the right outcomes, it's a better situation. So communication is essential. And number three, really, really unifying that plan together. Because if that dialogue is there and your really shared outcomes is driving a secure and culture within what you're building, it doesn't matter what part of the build it is. It doesn't matter what part of the business it is. Once you see the mutual respect of unifying that journey, it's all for the betterment of the customer. And when it's seen from that perspective, agility is enabled.
Got it. And then let's do one more question before we move on to the next kind of talk track around measuring success. But why don't we keep going down this thread? We've been talking about communicating risk in the vein of helping folks understand it. And I guess I'm a strong supporter of that's step one. But ultimately, we don't just want them to understand it, right? We want folks to act. We want them to address it. We want them to do something about it. And security is reliant on others to take that action, working to influence them. So I know in our conversations, Tunde, there's some specific language you like to use. Are you comfortable sharing with the audience, what that is? I know we had one conversation about, security versus risk is a big one. Risk versus business impact. How you position these things as, are we doing remediation or bug fixing? Just that the words here actually matter. Do you mind sharing some of that with the audience? Kind of what you found effective?
Absolutely. And just talking like a technologist and talking like one that runs engineering teams and what have you, the language matters, because how you're communicating something matters. When you talk to a developer and you're talking to a product manager and you're talking from the context of a feature versus a vulnerability, or a feature versus a bug, the brain power gets engaged in different ways. Because when you think about features, that you're making the deterministic decision between getting a new feature or something that is a weakness in the application. No matter how you categorize it, a bug is a bug. It just comes down to how do you prioritize the message there. But if you go and say, oh, we have a threat, the threat is an exploit on this particular application module, and you have to fix that now, and it's more important than this feature you're planning to release, but you're dead on arrival, as my father-in-law will say. Like, it's just the message is lost. But if you can position the message in lingo that they would understand, that you have that mutual respect, whereas a bug, a vulnerability, or a misconfiguration or a deficiency all ties back to something. It is a bug in the cell, and it's a bug in the system. If you can position it as a bug, then prioritizing bugs across that conversation allows for a better transformation in the conversation, because a bug in how the application works is a different conversation from a threat that might happen to the application, because we know bugs are things that could always happen when engaged. So bilingual matters. How the parlance you use, the mannerism of how you communicate it, all plays a very, very important point of really having that effective communication, because truly effective communication is key. Being able to talk about it and make sure that what you are saying is captured properly.
Well put. It's actually perfect segue into. I mean, let's just jump into it. We've got about 5-10 minutes left for this portion of today, and talk about measuring success, right? Because hey, whether or not they understand it, let's assume we've done a good job and they understand it. Okay, we've got them to act on it. We've used the right language, kind of where we are. We've prioritized. We know we're focused on the right stuff. So we go down that track and talk about, well, how are we measuring success? And the reality is it's kind of hard, I think, in security, because success is quiet. Success is calm, right? As opposed to other parts of the business. Success is winning a deal. It is getting money. Success is pushing a new feature. There's functionality there. So yes, we did a bug, but I don't really see it. So let's kind of like take that concept and run with it a little bit. How do you show a win for you and your team? Basically, when how do you know you're successful? When the whole goal is really that nothing happens.
Right. So one of the things that becomes important when you drive change is you need time to maintain systems. A measure of system availability becomes a very, very big conversation, because when your system is available longer, most of our platforms have SLIs or SLOs that we have set for them. 3 nines, 4 nines, depending on what we have actually put in place. Security practitioners need to start looking at things from that particular perspective, where if I've tested well and driven the right time and to actually have my maintenance minutes reduced for when I drive patching, and the system can be back up and running in time, it's a different value you've created, because your systems are now up in a better time to serve customers. You're having that better conversation around the value you're creating by just doing your patch management processes, prioritizing it, and making sure you're doing a good job to drive change. It's a change management ability, but it really ties into availability of the platform, making the system readily available for customers or to team members or what have you. But through that conversation, it's really a different conversation, where it's not just about the threat or what was remediated, but how you're creating availability for the utilization of platforms.
Got it. And I want to call something out to the audience. Tunde, you must be good at your job, because Ahmad's over here nodding in agreement with that usage of the word availability. And so I think really what happened, Ahmad, I'd love to kind of hear your take. Why don't you share with the audience like why you're head nodding? I've got a hunch, but I mean, it sounds candidly like Tunde was speaking your language to what we were talking about earlier, ties to the business. But what do you think? Is that why? Was it something else? Why?
No, absolutely. Yeah, availability. It's probably, at least when I look at it from a business perspective, right? It's one of the top metric, one of the top metrics we're tracking, right? We have, as Tunde said, SLAs, and if we're not able to adhere to it, there's dollar amount associated with it, right? It affects our bottom line, the customer experience, the usability. I mean, there's a list of things that goes along with it. So I think generally when we're thinking about patching, we're thinking about, either it's regular sort of or ad hoc, however it's happening. We don't think about that availability, or security generally not thinking about availability. It's more about a burn down. Okay, we patched 1 million vulnerabilities in this cycle, or we adhere to SLA, which is a pretty good metric as well, adherence to SLA, but still understanding that was there any downside to it? Did we stop the systems for more than 2 hours or 4 hours? And so I think that, to me, from a business perspective, I keep going back to the availability. That's pretty key for a SaaS company. Right? So that affects directly our bottom line.
Yeah, I think that just kind of reiterates a point made earlier. I don't remember, Tunde, if it was you or Ahmad, if it was you, on just, different businesses are different. And we're talking about software companies primarily in cybersecurity, right? So availability, I think, it doesn't matter where you are, it's going to be important. But depending where you are, it's potentially, existential, in my experience, right? It changes. So on that, let's go to, I know that, of course, there's other kind of big business value metrics like availability. But instead of going down that path, why don't we go down a little bit into, okay, like let's talk about like how we got here. We start talking about vulnerability prioritization, ended up talking about availability, right? So there's obviously a connection there, but Tunde, I'm curious how you're breaking down like what KPIs you're using, how you're kind of tracking and the breadcrumbs from security bug to vulnerability to kind of show, hey, the progress along the way, right? Netting out like MTTR. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't know how you're tracking KPIs there, but do you have any advice or kind of like favorite KPIs you're willing to share with the audience as far as kind of connecting the bridge between, like the very like technology oriented, vulnerability, the bug, and kind of the business impact it makes on availability?
The example that I've used and I still used even till today is really thinking about how do you measure the time to value. So you alluded to MTTR, mean time to remediate, and mean time to remediate is a metric that everyone uses. It's how the shortest amount of time to get remediation in and back to a known good state of working. So MTTR is a key metric every VM or patch management program measures themselves on how quickly they can get things done and back to a known good state. But if you take a turn on that particular construct and say, is it just the mean time it takes for you to drive the remediation, or is the mean time back to availability, mean time to get the system back working without any need to backtrack or make any adjustments? Because the reality is you want to fix or you want to apply the right updates, and by the time it gets back, it is a better state than when it was before. So measuring that you've actually driven improvement with those is essential. It's truly essential that you're able to not just think about, I have reduced the time it takes for me to remediate, but I've also reduced the amount of time it takes to correct the impacts created based on the fact that we've not covered all of our bases, we've not tested all of our functions, we didn't really map the blast radius of what that particular patch could do. Because as you think, when you patch and update things, you think about, oh, you're fixing this thing, and the security team is focused on fixing that thing. But the thing you fix might change the behavior of how other parts of the application is working, or how responsiveness works, or create a new condition of delay, or introduces latency. All those things are things that are byproduct of the update cycle. So the more you can reduce that time to correct what impacts gets created during that modification, the better story you can tell. And the better you can show that the teams are actually following those fundamental practices to not just throw the patch out there, but to test it, measure impact, have walkarounds, have backup strategies, have things to be able to reduce that time and ensure that back to operations is an objective as fast as possible.
Oh, got it. And that kind of begs the question. I'll just, we're running short on time here. I can't believe how fast this has gone. In conversations I have anyway, feeling anything about, how many folks join this webinar and being proactive, there definitely feels to be an appetite to be more proactive. One of the blockers that I, chat with folks about, it's, yes, security and cybersecurity has matured, but every different enterprise at their own kind of stage in that maturity journey. So some folks are already kind of, leading the pack on the proactive side of the world. Others are just getting started, and they're at that point where they want to do it, but they don't quite know how to even make the business case to build that muscle, right? Like they've been focused on kind of the incident response side of the world. They've been focused on detecting that side of the world. So Tunde and Ahmad, do you have any words of wisdom to those folks that, are in that category? They're eager to be more proactive, but they're trying to make the business case itself to fund that initiative.
Very, very important that when you think about the business case of funding initiatives to make you faster, there is an inclusive word that you use that most security practitioners don't forget. We think about the security outcome. We don't think about the business case. What does it do for the business? I think by the end of this webinar, if one message makes it across, is we have to think about ourselves as a business and how we articulate the business of what value we're creating. Because many times our organizations are considered to be a cost center, but when we are a value creating team and positioning it from a business perspective, the conversation shifts. So your business case has to be tied to true outcomes of what thing in the business will be better. I'm sure Ahmad would love to see that when things that are tied to security outputs or security objectives can actually make him have a better NPS score, or something that is a measure that allows the platform to be positioned in a better light, he will sign the dotted line in seconds once that business case is created or is positioned. Because the reality is you've made it trigger an emotional reaction in the things you're going to do to make the business better. So we have to always think about that from that construct. It challenges us to think differently, to talk differently, to write differently. But truly, when we think about it differently and really help dig deep into the understanding and partner with our peers in those business functions that are successful, you cannot imagine how many people are very, very successful always getting their business case of why. They know how to articulate it to trigger an emotional experience. I love the Staples big red button because it's exactly why I like to use it as an analogy. What is the big red button you need to push for that leader that will make him say always yes, always yes, always yes? Once you find that in your business case, it doesn't really matter what you're doing, but you can tie that to a business outcome and something that will enable your business to be better. It positions you in the right light.
Got it. What do you think, Ahmad? Does that sound right to you?
Absolutely. And I think the other way to look at it is what we're doing today is not working. So we need to change. We need to change. And yes, change is hard. But other industries, we look at IT transformation, cloud transformation. There was no Salesforce.com 30 years ago, right? Salesforce, marketing, all these platforms transformed. And I think cybersecurity is time to transform from this very reactive way of working to join the business and be more proactive, gain more visibility, provide insights and metrics that actually makes business run better.
All right. Well, that's almost all the time we have for our fireside chat today. Thank you so much to Tunde and Ahmad for contributing. To wrap up, let's do one just final question. 30-second response, from your own perspective. One for Tunde, we'll go with you. Ahmad, we'll go with you. Actually, let's flip it up. Ahmad, why don't we start with you? Tunde, we'll wrap up with you. Why do you think getting more proactive about security right now is so important?
I think fundamentally, in the last few years, the attack surface has increased so much that as I said, the reactive way is just not working, right? You're just always playing catch up. You come in the morning, you have book of work, you try to get to that by the end of the day, and you start all over again the next day. I mean, that's just, there's no way to measure it. It's not effective. So if you don't change, this is going to be, it's already getting to be very hard. It's going to be impossible to address. That's proactive, gets you a little bit of a head start, and you're able to actually add value at the end of the day. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ahmad. Tunde?
So I just love the word proactive, because it means you're doing something before it becomes a problem. So being proactive means that before it causes an issue that you have to now drop everything and need to figure out how to make things work, being proactive just makes sense. So doing what's important, risk-based remediation proactively means you are actually creating value, where things don't cause an outage, an issue, a complication, or impact to your organization. If we think about it from that particular perspective, you are truly driving business value by being proactive. So it's the name of the game. We're no longer trying to wait for something to happen. We're dealing with things before it becomes a problem to make sure that we're better than our competition.
All right. Well, you all heard it here first. Thank you, Tunde. Thank you, Ahmad. Before I hand it back to you, Terry, just real quick, if for the audience, if today's topic has your attention, if you want to dive deeper into proactive security, we at Brinka will be sharing a guide with you on how to implement a risk operations center. And for those of you unfamiliar with that term, a risk operations center, it's really a new approach to managing exposures pre-attack. So think of it as really on topic, on point of the approach some of the leading organizations in the world are taking to proactively address those threat exposures, before they become problems, for all the reasons we talked about today. So keep an eye out for that. We're excited to share that with you. It's hot off the presses. We're announcing the white paper here on this webinar, so you get first access to it. And with that, Terry, can you fire up the last poll? And then I think we'll do a quick Q&A after that before we close out for the day.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So we're asking in this next poll, on a scale of 1 to 4, what is your level of confidence in your organization's ability to set up and run this type of proactive security program? This is a great question. I'm not confident in the siloed data from various tools. I have the data, but it sits in siloed security, making it difficult to prioritize effectively. I've got the data, but struggle to communicate it at a business level. I am already running this type of program. I have my own idea of what's going to come out ahead here. Tunde, what's your sense of?
I'm not gambling. No, danger, Will Robinson. There will be no gambling.
Right.
No, if I was to read the room and read the engagement based on the attendee list, I would say that it's a delicate balance between 2 and 3, whereas and some 4 based on mature organizations. But I would say it's a little bit of all, where you would see a balance where some solutions are in a place, but they're still working to get to where they can platform it right to drive prioritization, and really the journey of technical practitioners that are just trying to communicate at the business level and just wanting to learn and pick that up, and so figuring out how to really articulate that by engaging better become a thing. So it's going to be all over the place, I see.
All right. Let's see where our audience is with this.
I'm gonna buy a lotto.
Feeling lucky today, huh? Okay.
I'm feeling lucky.
Ahmad, what's your sense of this? Are you surprised by this result?
No, not at all. When we engage with our customers, or when the customers reach out to us, it's generally they're at the 1 or 2 level, right? They have built something in house that's doing more around that number 2 point, or they have nothing in place, which would be more 1. But and so it's that 2 or 3 working towards 4. I can say that with the confidence that a lot of our customers in that on 4, so no, this doesn't surprise me, and it's a tough challenge. So if folks out there listening to this don't feel that you're fundamentally doing something wrong, there's sort of some technical aspect and some change in the process that required to build that. So but there are solutions, and Brinka is sort of the leading provider of that as well. Yeah.
Thanks. One last poll. We'll be quick about this, so we have time for the Q&A. I guess we're right to the Q&A. Excellent. Well, let's question for both Ahmad and Tunde. One of our audience members asks, I've seen more reactive tools and solutions in the past. Do you see the industry moving toward being more proactive and delivering more proactive measures as opposed to reactive measures as a function going forward? Tunde, will you kick us off there?
Sure. I believe part of why this was put together, the white paper you're going to see from Brinka, is really the fact that there's companies leading the pack to try to solve this because they recognize that it's a problem. Historically, many organizations have had to build this by powering integrations with different technologies and trying to drive that. So The data is there. So the good news is the data is there. It's the representation of the data and enriching it with right context. Context is important when you want to talk to the business. So using the right business context based on the CIs that are impacted or what have you becomes tremendously important. So I think the journey is there, the capability is there. The right companies are looking at this problem statement and trying to drive to those outcomes. So I say good news. There's more at the end of the tunnels for us to go through. So more to come.
Thanks for that. Ahmad, anything to add there?
No, I think in the interest of time, I think Tunde captured it pretty well. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Another audience question. We have them asking about how with vulnerabilities, you have OEMs, ISVs are offering regular patches. While these are effort consuming based on downtime windows, they get applied. Yet for code developed in-house or outsourced, what precise methods do you apply as best practices as preventive measures? Tunde, is that something you can help us understand better?
I think when you think about it's a tricky one. It's not easy. It comes down to what we talked about earlier, when it's really communication. Like, I'm sure if you're able to articulate the value of something you're trying to do to someone that's trying to push the right release or to push an update and really help bake that in, I really, really believe, because I've seen it work. I've seen it work in the right organizations if you're able to put in the effort. Really having that shared cohort with your team, with your partners in other parts of the organization, and really enabling that part of the journey. As you can imagine, I'm an extrovert. I like talk. So creating those relationships and finding a way to be able to showcase that prioritization, why it's important, the why for them. So it's not just a whack-a-mole exercise of wanting to do everything. And also taking the conversation forward that you're making a risk-based decision in what you're doing and showing that you're making a impact-based assessment. I really believe. I've seen it work, and I think it'll work for you.
Excellent. Ahmad, a question for you from our audience. Many of my clients haven't had cyber incidents that have had a large impact on their business, and so they're reluctant to spend money on security controls or comprehensive cyber insurance. This is, I think, an industry-wide dynamic. I'm not going to call it a problem, but it is certainly a dynamic that I think is more common than we imagine. What would be the top 3 to 5 controls for or insurance that you'd recommend prioritizing for these budget-constrained companies?
I think I would say probably Tunde can answer this better, being sitting on the practitioner side. But from my point of view, looking at, and it is a common sort of not argument, but point raised, and I think we talked a little bit about it. The absence of any major incident, how do you justify that spending? And I think it's again going back and understanding explaining to business. Just because it hasn't happened, it does not mean it will not happen, right? In showing the current state in the terms and language they understand, and I think this will drive the action. Again, it's that being proactive. They say that in cybersecurity, it sounds like a little bit of fear mongering. That it's not about if, it's about when. And everybody, my exec staff, when I go to my board meetings, cybersecurity is part of the conversation. So you need to be able to have that clear view, clear understanding of how things are working, and you get that by being proactive, by having a real visibility into your systems, your weaknesses, your known weaknesses, gaps. Doesn't mean you fix everything. We talk about prioritization, but that clarity comes from being proactive. And I think that's the business case. Is we're in this world. I think there's some question about Gen AI. I get asked a lot about that as well. So again, it goes back to, are we prepared? What are we thinking about? How are we measuring the success? All of that sort of goes back to that proactive, being transparent, being clear, and that's a business case in itself. I'll just finish it with the last comment. TSA, we all go through the airport. We think it's annoying security, but we know that the reason it exists. We haven't had an incident in knock on wood over 20 some years. So does that mean we should stop investing? in airport security, I think all would agree that yes, it's very annoying and we don't really want to take our shoes off and belts off, at least in US, if you're in US, but we all agree that it's an important thing and we should do it. So I think it's that level of understanding, and if we apply that to business, I think things will get funded.
Thank you.
There was a magical nugget that Ahmad added, which is really around how do you talk about things. And the TSA example is just perfect. Like it's an insurance policy that ensures that you're able to make sure that when and if it does happen, understanding cost constraints and what have you, and trying to, like, I envy anyone that I'll be concerned, or not envious of a person right now that's trying to make an investment decision to do cyber insurance in this cost constraint, because it's treated like insurance. But the reality is, and I say this, if you're not able to articulate it to showcase the value of reputational impact, recent breaches have caused material impacts. The SEC also is paying attention to those things and will be looking at organizations that don't have that as part of their strategy to ensure that if a material event occurs, you actually have what it takes to not cause material harm to your investor. So the SEC has given you some ammunition to use there. Again, it comes down to what Ahmad said. You got to say it right. You have to position it properly. You have to make sure you can sell what you're trying to do.
Thanks, Tunde. Tunde, I'm going to give you the final word here with the last question. We have an audience member asking, what's the one threat to cloud infrastructure that's keeping you up at night in 2024?
Wow. I won't call it one threat. But if I was to lump it together, I would say permissions a la misconfigurations. If you're not paying attention to permissions, a la your configurations, like many times we forget to do the basics. So let's get the basics right and drive a better understanding of permissioning. It really is where threat actors are working right now. We see a lot of things happening where the recent breaches have been focused on those two elements, permissioning and not getting the basic right. So the thing that keeps me up is making sure that we don't undo good foundational controls and right permissioning that we've set across our environments.
Good stuff. That is going to bring us to a close. Gentlemen, you have helped us to begin thinking a lot differently about proactivity, and just a curious side note, how much of that actually comes down to smart prioritization. So thanks for helping us think differently about this topic, one that maybe we thought we understood a lot better. But great insights here. Thank you all for your comments.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Alex. And thanks, Tunde. Enjoyed the conversation here. And thanks, everyone, for joining.
I also want to thank everyone for attending this Black Hat seminar on the CISO perspective, proactive security in 2024, brought to you by Black Hat, Brinca, and Informa. Shortly after this live event ends, you'll be receiving an email that'll help you access this presentation on demand. You're welcome to share this with colleagues who may not have been able to be part of the live presentation today. On behalf of our guest experts, Tunde Oni-Daniel, Ahmad Fida, and Alex Babar, and our sponsor, Brinca, thank you so much for your time today. This has been Terry Sweeney for Black Hat. We'll see you next time.